Welcome to Financial Issues, where we join reality with truth, helping you make the most of your money by honoring God with your investments. Now listen in as we give you the practical tools and advice you need to become a biblically responsible investor.
Well, good morning, folks. Welcome to Financial Issues. It's good to be here with you. I'm Seth Udinsky, along with the Studio A team, Sam Case, and the rest of the team here with you this morning. Good to be here today, folks. We're live this morning, Tuesday, February the 25th. Grateful for you all joining us today. Thanks for joining us. The phone lines are open, so you're welcome to call in if you'd like at 610-363-1110. Folks, on today's show, let's get right to it. So inflation has yet to start easing under the Trump administration, and the question we're going to ask and hopefully answer later in the show is how do we make sense of this now a month into his second term and a few days. Also, we'll get some tips and tricks for estate planning. You'll hear a teachable moment from our host, Shana I'll get your calls and questions as well. We got a couple questions queued up there too. Craig Haugaard is going to join me later in the program as well to continue our conversation last week on egg prices, as well as the bird flu nonsense and what to do about that. I know several of you submitted questions, so we'll get to those also. But before any of that, I have a special, somewhat surprise guest joining me today. She's not a surprise because you know her and love her, but I wanted to get Twila on with me, Twila Brase, before I go out on paternity leave one more time, because several of you had follow-up questions about the Real ID conversation that we had last time we had Twila on, I believe 2 weeks ago. So Twila, thank you for joining me on a rather short notice. Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
It's always great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, just a reminder, Twila Brase, the president and co-founder of CCH Freedom. You can check them out at cchfreedom.org, cchfreedom.org, doing great work fighting for our health freedoms. All right, Twila, let's pick it up where we left off last time. Just remind our listeners of the potential dangers of this type of identification that the U.S. government is pushing called Real ID, especially when it comes to government intervention and what CCH Freedom is doing to try to stop this. What do we need to know?
So what you need to know is that Real ID is not just a card. It's not just another card. It is a national identification system. So it is not just a national card. Again, it is a national system. Yeah. And the whole idea here from those who are pushing it is that that credential will eventually go on your smartphone and they will have real-time remote access to it. In addition to that, the federal law, which does not have to be followed by the states, but currently all the states submitted. But the federal law says that the Secretary of Homeland Security has complete and sole authority to expand the uses of that credential. So they could say that you need to have a Real ID to get married, to open a bank account, to access health care, to buy a gun, to rent a hotel, whatever they wanted to. And it's only the secretary, and the secretary in a federal rule several years ago said that they do not believe that they have to go back to the president or Congress in order to expand the uses. So what we've got right now is an unconstitutional national ID, and Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, actually on the floor of the Senate, called it a national ID, and he said, I don't think we've talked to the American public about this, and maybe we should do that before we pass this thing. But of course, they didn't. And so it is a usurpation of states' rights. It's a violation of privacy rights. It's a federal takeover of identification, driving, transportation, and potentially, eventually, purchases and all the interactions of your life. And so if you have a star on your card, typically it's a gold star or a white star surrounded by gold. There are some black stars surrounded by white. In California, there's a star inside a bear, a symbol of a bear. Now, you have a Real ID, and we encourage you to go back to the DMV in all the states where that can happen. There's only 5 states where it can't happen. Go back to the DMV and get yourself a standard driver's license, so they're not able to flip the switch on this and suddenly require it for everybody, and then we have a national ID system and everybody has submitted and lost their freedom.
Yeah. Now, Twila, I have a follow-up here. This is from a listener of our show, a faithful partner named Menda. She lives in Georgia. I believe Georgia is one of those 5 states where basically if you have the Real ID, that's the way it goes. But her question is this. So Twila mentioned last time adding states/legislatures to her coalition against Real ID. What's the most impactful way to entertain Georgia legislatures to discuss writing laws to repeal Real ID? And does she have a model bill that we can look at? Real ID is required in Georgia, and I was informed I could not get that traditional driver's license. What insight would you have for her, Twila?
So first you need to find a legislator who is concerned about privacy, and then you have to have a conversation with them on our website, and we have a special website for this, or a special URL, a link, refuserealid.org, refuserealid.org, and we have a 7 reasons document which you could give to your legislators, and then convince them of what this thing is. Now, an interesting thing about this to help the argument is that initially in 2008, when the first federal rule came out, 37 states either wrote laws prohibiting compliance with Real ID or wrote resolutions opposing Real ID. And so there was a real concerted effort earlier by state legislators who knew that their rights, the rights of the state, their rights as legislators, their rights to their constituents are all being squashed by this law. So go get that, talk to privacy legislators. And in Maine, it is Laurel Libby who is leading the charge there, and she has gotten Democrats on her bill. She's the only Republican on her bill. She's trying to make it a bipartisan bill. So that's another thing. Just talk to Republicans and Democrats and find those who don't want a national ID card. Call it a national ID card, because that is what it is.
Yeah, really important using language there. And would you suggest, Twila, when we're talking to elected officials, using national ID card, because that describes it more accurately than the Real ID kind of nickname that they've given to it? Am I correct in understanding that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And, now you have this ID, right? You don't even have your state driver's license, right? It is a state, and it is a driver's license, sort of, but it's all under the Real ID, the national ID law. And on the 7 points that you can get on our website, we actually have the quote from Senator Lamar Alexander calling it a national identification card. So you can use that as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I did drop that link in the chat, folks. So if you're on financialissues.org/live, you can check that link out there. Twila, that is great. So we got another question from a listener who was kind of curious about why we should be concerned about Real ID when the government already has some level of trackability of us. We all have a social security number, for example. What makes possessing Real ID perhaps different and more dangerous than just having a regular ID?
Yeah, so it is the one card, the one national card, and it's not even a card. They testified, the DMV, the head of the DMVs across the country, testified to Congress in December 2023 that their plan is to start with 2% of the IDs on people's phones, and then continue to expand from there. And if you're at airports now, I just saw my first sign saying that a digital ID could be used to get through TSA. So the move is on to put this electronic digital credential on your private phone and use your phone to give you access to transactions or refuse to, because they can just shut off your ID anytime that they want. And suddenly there you'll be. You won't be able to do anything that you do today with your card because they control it. You won't have a paper one. It's only digital under their control. And this is really moving to a Chinese social credit system. So imagine if we had the Harris administration now, and the possibility that kind of administration, which would want to gain control over, they want 15-minute cities, right? They don't want you outside your city. Well, the phone could tell if you were going outside your city, right? Yeah. So we don't want this kind of access of the government to our phone, and it's unconstitutional. Let's just not forget. This is a violation of states' rights, longtime states' rights, and individual privacy rights. And so we should not just acquiesce to this or think this is just innocuous. This is huge. This is like the Vax passport, only even bigger.
So, Twila, one more time as we're coming to the end of this segment here, give our listeners some ways that they can get involved to make sure that this number of Real ID owners decreases and this thing does not get the legs that it seems like it's starting to get. What can we do?
So everybody needs to call their senator at the congressional level and their House member, because right now there are 60 legislative days where they could use a Congressional Review Act, a simple 2-line bill, to withdraw the rule that is going to start progressive enforcement on May 7th. Everybody who's worried that our organization, the lead of this issue, is not going to be successful, should simply go get a passport. Just go get a passport and turn your real ID in and get a standard driver's license. But you need to contact senators and representatives, because they have told us they're not hearing about this. They don't think this is an issue. And I've said nobody knows. But you all need to call, because we've got a very short time limit now to get the rule withdrawn at the federal level. Otherwise, the battle is going to be even bigger.
Twila, we appreciate you so much. And again, thank you for joining me on a rather short notice here. Folks, I dropped that link in the chat, cchfreedom.org. If you click on the national ID card, which when I went there, it was the first one that came up, you can check out all the different points that Twila has there. Really, really good stuff, and how you can take action today. Twila, thanks so much for joining me here on Financial Issues. Folks, we'll be right back after this break. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us. We'll be back. How is Timothy Plan continuing to lead the fight as you guys now enter your 4th decade of leading this fight of biblically responsible investing?
We've been too silent for too long, and we can no longer be silent. You stand up, like Ronald Reagan said, we're only one generation away from losing all of our liberty. It has to be fought for. I wish it didn't. And you can fight for it. You don't need guns and ammunition and that. You can fight for it, especially with your dollars, because it's always about the money. And when the money starts impacting people, they start paying attention. When we launched this, they said it couldn't be done, but here we are 30 years later. They said you couldn't get competitive returns, but here we are.
What a tremendous testament of God's grace.
Go to financialissues.org/Timothy Plans to learn more about Timothy Plan.
My name is Reagan Gardner, and I am in the 4th grade. Last year, I wanted to be like everybody else. I thought I had to act different, look different, and be different to be cool. When I joined Crossroads, I learned that God loves me just the way that I am.
Help reach more kids like Reagan with the hope of the gospel. To learn more about Crossroads Kids Club and how you can get involved, visit reachourschools.com.
Hearing Jesus say, "Well done," how to secure your rewards in heaven. Don't you want to be sure that when you get there, that you're going to have the best life forever? And that best life forever is being able to access the plethora of wonderful, escalating rewards that are elucidated throughout the book of Revelation to those who overcome. Well, that's what the book's about, friend.
Order your copy of Hearing Jesus Say Well Done today on Amazon and start living for what truly matters.
Securities offered through G.A. Reppel & Company, a registered broker-dealer and investment advisor, member FINRA and SIPC. Opinions expressed by Shana are hers alone and are for informational purposes only and do not necessarily represent those of G.A. Reppel or the outlet on which you are listening. You should consider how the information applies to your situation prior to personally implementing it, and consult any financial professional you work with to make sure it's applicable to your financial plan.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us here on Financial Issues. If you missed that interview with Twila, go back and listen to it. If you got follow-up questions, folks, please do let us know. I do think this will be an ongoing topic. So the next time that we have Twila on, which it might be with me, if I'm on paternity leave, it might be with Shana. But the next time that we have her on, we'll make sure to ask some follow-ups on this. If you've got follow-up questions, just send them in. We'd love to be able to help you out with this, especially if you're like Menda from Georgia and you live in one of those states that is requiring real ID. That's the letter of the law. So, please do get those into us, folks. We appreciate Twila so much. I'm grateful for the work that she's doing. Quickly here, let's look at what the markets did yesterday. So, They started in positive territory, but then they skidded into a mixed outing. And by midday, the Dow Jones was the lone leader. The S&P and the NASDAQ were continuing downward. The indices looked to claw back positive, so the S&P joined the Dow Jones in the green for a little bit in the afternoon, but then by midday, kind of back below the flat line. So the Dow Jones was the only winner, and it was barely above the flat line. The S&P 500 finished 0.5% in the negative, and the NASDAQ finished well over 1% in the negative as well. So not a great effort to try to make a comeback from the end of last week. But to start the morning this week, everything's pretty flat right now as well. So the Dow Jones is up a little bit, predicting a positive start, while the S&P 500 is right at the flat line, and the NASDAQ is a little below that as well. Nothing too crazy to report from the markets there. We did get Home Depot earnings came out this morning. They barely beat Wall Street's estimates for quarter four. It was actually the first positive comparable sale number after 8 straight negatives. Folks, it makes sense. You're seeing home prices on the rise. You're seeing interest rates still skyrocketing as well. The result is many homeowners just can't or maybe won't undergo home renovation projects. One of the reasons that you typically do a home renovation project, unless it's a big need, say if you need an extra bedroom or something like that, it's usually to raise the value of the home. Well, costs have been rising anyway, so it's not like you need that renovation to really jack up the price of your home when they've been rising naturally. So because of that, businesses like Home Depot and Lowe's have had certain areas where maybe they've been seeing some struggles. Home Depot did have a positive one, though. Earnings per share barely beat it. Revenue barely beat it as well. So kind of the big news from the markets there, folks. All right, let's move to a teachable moment here. So we talked about this at the top of the show. Estate planning basics. I think this is really important for all of us, no matter the age or stage that you are in. Today, tomorrow, and Thursday, we're going to do kind of a teachable moment mini-series here on the basics of estate planning. I believe you're never too young to start thinking about this if you're around my age or Sam's age. But for the rest of you, you might be in the stage now where you're implementing these principles. So it's really good for you to hear this. This first one is Shana and Jason on the basics of estate planning. Here they are.
One thing that we get asked about a little bit, but I don't think we get asked enough, is about estate planning. Because estate planning, I think for most people, it seems like something that only 70 or 80-year-olds really need to do. But that's not true. It is for everyone. In fact, even if you don't have a will, you have likely already done some estate planning, whether you know it or not, and whether you've done it well or not is another question. If you have named beneficiaries on your IRA or your 401k or designated a beneficiary on your bank accounts, you have actually done some estate planning. And you have done nothing. You have planned to do whatever the court says that they will do with your assets. So, one of the first things that we need to make a distinction about is which assets are probate and non-probate. So if you have a will, it controls all of the assets that fall under the jurisdiction of the will and that are settled when the will is probated. But it's very likely that you have some assets or accounts that will not fall under your will, even if you have one. That may be a little bit of good news for those of you who don't have one. So your IRA, your 401k, your employer plan at work, life insurance, if you have annuities, those kind of assets are non-probate assets, and they get passed according to the beneficiary designation that you have set up. So when people get a chance to designate beneficiaries, hopefully they do that. If they don't, then it just goes to their estate, and then it defaults to whatever their will says. Or if they don't have a will, it goes to the court and is split up according to the laws of the state. So, most people will be diligent enough to at least name their spouse if they're married, or maybe a parent if they're not married, or a sister or brother or something like that. But some people actually go a little bit further and name contingent beneficiaries, like this is who will inherit the money if me and my primary beneficiary die at the same time or shortly after. And they'll list other people. So for married people with kids, that's easy. They usually say, well, it's my spouse, and then it goes to my kids. But there's a way that you can go even further, because as you accumulate assets, you really want to be thinking generationally as you do your estate planning. So sometimes you have an option to designate beneficiaries beyond the contingent beneficiaries by designating them as per stirpes. So Jason, would you speak to what that means and when it's a good idea to consider it?
Absolutely, Shana. So if your beneficiaries may be at the age of passing on your accounts, adding per stirpes will help pass that down to the next generation or staying in the generation. So per stirpes is just designates who will inherit assets if a beneficiary dies before the person who probably owns the account or in other cases created the will passes.
Mm-hmm. Good.
We're not any. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
In English, I guess kind of that means like if I say my spouse is my beneficiary, my kids are my contingents, and I mark per stirpes on my kids, it means that their share of the inheritance is actually going to be passed to their children. So, not every account that we have has the opportunity to do that. But, if that's what your wishes are, then that's a great, easy workaround, to doing that. So what about, like in the example that I just gave, my kids are 11 and 13. So they are not responsible enough to handle money. And if they inherit money, the court's going to decide who gets to handle the money until they become of age. So, if you don't designate who gets to make financial decisions for the minors, the court is going to do it. And likely it will be their parent. So what if your son's what if your son is your beneficiary, your son dies, and his ex-wife is appointed by the court to handle the money for the grandchildren? That's definitely something to think about. So also, minors can't inherit money in their own name. So you would want to consider like a testamentary trust, which is simply a trust that doesn't go into effect until the time that you die and they inherit the money. So you can specify terms, you can specify timelines that you want for those kids to inherit the money. You can say what you want the money to be used for. You can say whether or not you want to pay the the custodian for managing that money. And you can potentially protect it from any future divorces that your kids might have in some states, like Texas. I know that inheritance are considered separate property, even though it's a community property state, as long as you keep it separate. And a testamentary trust can do that. So, Jason, what if you don't have time or the financial resources to hire a lawyer and get these, get these specific, documents in place? Are there any workarounds?
Yes. What I do like is when putting the legal documents together, let's look at all of the accounts that have beneficial designation. So for instance, in my case, life insurance, I found that, of course, my 2-year-old is a minor, but of course I want to add her as a contingent if something happens to my wife and I, since she's the primary beneficiary there, but she's a minor. So yes, of course, having that testamentary trust would be very important there to catch it. But most life insurance companies, I should say all financial institutions, should allow the ability to designate maybe a trustee as well on there, so you can update that. Most of these companies have the ability to update things online. If you're comfortable with that, at least for me personally, I was able to do that. I was able to add a trustee for the benefit of my 2-year-old if something happens to my wife and I. So I can at least update that for now as a workaround. It was cost effective because you just update it online. But of course, the recommendation is making sure that your estate planning attorney has legal documents put together to match your plan as well. That's really the better fail-safe, but that's a cost-efficient workaround as well.
So, folks, we'll continue that conversation tomorrow, part 2 of the estate planning basics with Shana and Jason. You're going to want to join tomorrow. We'll do it in the first part of the program. Sam, with the time we have left here, we got a question that came in on the chat. I think this was yesterday, John from Alabama. It was late in the chat, so I was grateful we were able to grab it. But what do we have from John there, Sam?
Yeah, Seth. So John is asking about a bank called Old Glory Bank, and simply he wants to know, what do you think about it?
Well, John, thanks for asking that. I did some research into this banking institution. I didn't didn't see anything alarming about it. It seems fine if you're confident in it. I do like their patriotic values. That seems to be on full display. The one thing that I looked for right away was, are they FDIC insured? It looks like they are, which is good also. I think one thing, John, for you to consider, and this is just a common sense thing for you, is when you're talking about your operating expenses. So Shana talks about that a lot, like your checking account, and maybe you could include your savings account in that also. It's money that you can easily access, different from your investable money, perhaps, or a retirement plan or something. It's good to have those assets available. So we talk about liquid and local. Liquid might not be an issue, but unless you live near Oklahoma City, which is where this bank is located in, it looks like you might not be as local as you'd like. And if you are from Alabama, as your title says in the chat, that'd be a pretty long commute if you wanted to try to get to your physical bank, if you needed to for some reason. So my preference, and this is not the end-all be-all, you can do whatever you want. My preference is, I like to be able to bank at least local enough where I can get to know my bankers. I can drive there. The place that I do my banking with actually is not far from the ministry. It's a couple minutes down the road. So if I can stop there on my way home from work, for example, if I need to. It's nice to get to build relationships with those. Could be advantageous for you, and you probably would lose that if you chose to bank with something like this simply for location. So I think that's just something for you to consider. But once again, this is a conscience issue. I think it's up to you. And it definitely is exciting to see banks out there that seem to have good, solid American values. I love to see that. So, John, it's a good question there. I appreciate you asking. Folks, if you got to leave us, we hope you have a great day, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow. For the rest of you, Craig Haugaard is coming up here. If you got questions for Craig, make sure to get those in. We will answer some of the questions that you all asked from last time concerning those rising egg prices and bird flu. So more financial issues coming up right after this. You don't want to miss it. We'll be back.
In the last 10 to 15 years being in ministry, being married, something that has been constant in our lives is Samaritan Ministries. As we've moved, we've had babies, we've had different things come up, we have just been able to rely on Samaritan in ways that we never really even thought about before becoming members.
Our heart's desire is to plant roots and be in a place for a really long time. It's how we were raised. We see the benefits of that, but we also see the open-handedness of being used by the Lord wherever He calls, because we just assumed when we started pursuing church planting, the quickest way to get from point A to point B is a straight line. And with the Lord, sometimes you find out it looks a lot more like this. And yet, Samaritan was with us through the entire thing.
We didn't have to look into, we have to change insurances now because we've moved states or whatever the case may be. And it's just been a real blessing to us in different phases of life.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Colleen.
And we're the Gen X.
And we're Samaritan members.
I found out I was pregnant when I was 21 years old. For me, I was scared, I was shaking. I Googled places to abort. We drive there, and as soon as we get there, I open the door, and the first thing that I see is a bunch of Bible verses in the walls. They gave me a little counseling session, they gave me the pregnancy test again, and they do an ultrasound. And that's when everything changed. When I saw my baby and when I heard her heartbeat, that was it. We decided with my boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband, to continue the pregnancy together. We started coming to the classes, doing our homework, getting counseling together. We've seen the hand of God ever since we stepped into the pregnancy center.
To find out how you can support the life-saving mission of Preborn, go to preborn.com/FISM.
Pharrell came to Crossroads as a fourth grader. His name had been brought to my attention by the school principal. She was concerned about the direction he was heading.
I remember I wasn't the best kid. I got into trouble a lot.
He became a very active part of Crossroads Kids Club.
Mr. Engel, he was the leader that really impacted my life in so many ways. I honestly didn't want Crossroads to end.
We would invite all the students to come to our youth group here at Waterfront.
I felt God saying, come on, come to me. It felt like I was set free.
And I'll never forget the day when we had the privilege and the honor to baptize Pharrell.
I hugged Mr. Engel. I don't know if he understands. I'm truly, thankful to have him through the whole journey. If it wasn't for Crossroads, I probably wouldn't be in the place that I am right now. I wouldn't be a follower of Christ.
Help reach more kids like Pharrell with the hope of the gospel. Visit reachOurSchools.com.
Welcome back to Financial Issues, everybody. Good to be here with you. Let's see, the markets just opened. And right now, everything, the major indices are pretty mixed overall, actually. The Dow Jones is looking fine. It's up about a 0.5 percentage point. The NASDAQ is down about 1/3, and the S&P 500 is just above the flat line. So we'll see if the markets can make a little comeback from somewhat of a disappointing day yesterday and a tough finish on Friday. But as I said on the previous segment there, we've got Craig Haugaard on the program with me. I did want to get Craig back on the program. Just like Twila earlier, folks, Craig, this is a bit of a short turnaround, but we had a few follow-up questions concerning this bird flu situation. So I wanted to get Craig's expertise on this. I do know we have a couple of farmers and ranchers in our audience, and we have quite a few people who are doing some level of homesteading. So you might not have a full farm, but you might have some chickens, you might have a chicken coop, or you might just be a regular person who likes eating eggs and has realized that egg prices have skyrocketed in the last couple years. So, Craig, it's great to have you back, brother. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Always happy to visit with you.
Likewise, brother. Yes. Let's get right to it. Any updates that you have for us on the bird flu situation since we spoke, I believe, early last week? Has there been any kind of a regain of control from the farming community, or is it still pretty wild out there? What can you tell us?
I think we're still kind of in a wild scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I look at what egg prices did in the week since we've spoken, egg prices, at least the price received by farmers on a national average, increased a little bit again last week. So certainly a shortage of eggs out there. I think if you look at the number of chickens actually laying eggs nationwide, we're down about 8% from what we were 3 years ago. And you know, that's a significant decline, and obviously is having a big impact on prices.
Yeah. So that's good to know there. So we got a question from for really the farmer who, you know, has a flock in his has a infection in his flock. What should he do? So, for instance, we had a question from a listener named Ann who was asking if chickens can take zinc for influenza. Would it work for chickens to suppress viral replication? So, what can you tell us about that, Craig?
You know, I think I don't know the answer to that. I do know that zinc deficiencies in chickens cause some problems. It's quite noticeable. Usually it's very short and thickened leg bone and frizzled feathers, some stunted growth. So a deficiency in zinc in chickens definitely causes some problems. Now, because of the size of a chicken, it's really easy to over-supplement them and cause zinc toxicity. So you're really kind of walking a fine line with zinc, and I think any of those micronutrients. I don't know, and I don't know actually if it's been explored the impact that would have on bird flu, but I do know that zinc is a trace mineral that chickens need in a small amount, and you know, not having it causes some real issues, and then of course having too much of it can cause some toxicity. So I guess you know, if you have a backyard flock or something like that, I would consult your local veterinarian on that, and they'd be able to kind of hit the sweet spot there for you, I think, on what those chickens require in the amount of zinc.
Absolutely. So, Ann, hopefully you're on the chat. I know you're a listener on the chat there, so hopefully that was able to give you some clarity. Thank you for that question. And, Craig, thanks for your answer. Now, kind of back to that bigger question, Craig. What should we do if we find out that there is an infection? What are the signs to look for, first of all? And then secondly, what's the best thing to do? My first reaction is you have to just kill the chickens. Like, is that what we do? What would be your response there?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And you get into some state and federal law with that, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, once I may be mistaken, but I'm fairly confident that once there's a known case of bird flu in that flock, as things stand right now, the government policy is to eliminate that flock, to kill them all, to try and prevent the spread. And they buy, or you know, kind of pay the producer for the replacement cost of that flock. And I'm not exactly sure how that works. I do know that since this started, we've paid out about $1.4 billion in payments to farmers who have had their their flocks destroyed. So you get into some legal issues there that I'm a little bit shaky on, but
Sure.
I am fairly confident that once that is noted in the population of your flock, that right now the approach in the United States at least is to kill all those birds off to try and prevent spread.
So it's an unfortunate reality, Craig, but obviously that then brings, I think, priority number one for our listeners who do have chickens is to protect them at all costs and make sure that the bird flu doesn't get to them. That's my next question for you is what are some good protocols for that? I mean, is it simply just keeping them cooped, making sure that they don't have contact with wild animals? How would you recommend we go about doing that?
You know, the spread really has been through migratory birds, and that's been the major way of spreading it. You tend to see bird flu, I think, first shows up usually in the kind of the backyard flock sort of thing. If you got some birds for your own egg production and that type of thing, seems to be the ones that tend to get hit the most because they are outside and they're exposed to migratory birds and that type of thing. When you look at the commercial flocks, there's a lot of biosecurity issues going on right now. For example, when we receive any ingredients into our feed mill, we require those trucks to stop and wash and disinfect their tires before they enter the property. When that feed is being delivered out to a chicken facility or a poultry facility, a lot of those facilities require the same thing, disinfectant of the tires and whatnot before they drive onto the property. In many cases, they're requiring people to wear hazmat suits to try and, there's some pretty extreme measures. In fact, I'm seeing some numbers that they're increasing the cost of poultry production by about 15% with the additional biosecurity steps that they're taking to try and prevent the flock. But your first instinct was correct, Seth. A flock that's a backyard flock is going to be more exposed to the elements and more apt to get it than a confined unit. And then those within the confined unit, they're taking additional steps to try and make sure that it's not, accidentally tracked into that facility.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Craig, let me switch gears for just a moment here because we got another question came in from a listener named Ravenwood007. Said, I'm a partner that lives in South Central North Dakota. Land prices are at all-time highs. They continue to rise. How do farmers make the high cost of inputs and land pencil out the given price of corn and beans? Would you have any insight on that one, Craig?
It is kind of a mind boggler. I don't know how old the listener is, but I kind of got into the business in the early 80s when people were losing their farms and it was going through an extremely hard time. And as you kind of look at land values right now, some of those things seem to be kind of tracking. I think the difference between now and the early 80s is the amount of money that people have kind of backing it up. We've seen a couple things. We've seen older established farmers that already own land at maybe a cheaper level kind of leverage that to buy some additional land, and they look at the average cost of that land across their whole operation sometimes to justify that. In other cases, we've seen outside investors that maybe are more interested in what that land can do from a recreational standpoint. We see a lot of guys who want some hunting property, especially where this listener is located in South Central North Dakota. I know the duck hunting is fantastic out there. And strangely enough, sometimes that recreational value gets priced in as well and helps support. So I do think there's a couple factors at play. I think there's much healthier balance sheets now on most farms than there was in the early 80s when we really saw that crisis and land prices back down. And then I also think there's more outside money that maybe sees that land maybe as a long-term investment, also as the recreational opportunities and stuff that come with that. And I think that combination is helping to support prices at levels that I kind of personally thought maybe we'd back down a little bit, but we're, as your listener says, we're not seeing that. We're seeing very strong levels.
Absolutely. All right, Craig, we're coming to the end of this here. I know you had a prayer request you wanted to share with our listeners. We have been praying for your health, brother, and we're grateful to see it seems to be steady improvement. But what can you share with our listeners? How can we be praying for you as you've continued to try to fight this?
And this is, I really appreciate the prayers, and it's made a huge difference. But I've got a fellow that I used to work with. He was a little 2-year-old son that was just recently diagnosed with, and I'll probably mispronounce this, B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Little Max Olson. Max is turned 2 years old here in October.
Wow.
And is going through chemotherapy now as a 2-year-old, and it looks like he's going to need chemo for, I think, the next 2.5 years as they're fighting this thing. So I know I've really appreciated the prayers, but I'm an old guy, and things happen. But
sure.
Poor little Max is a 2-year-old. I would really appreciate prayers for him and his folks and his sister as well as they walk through this. So I would just encourage the listeners to hold up Max Olson in your prayers as well.
Absolutely, brother. We will do it. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Craig. I know the Financial Issues family they're a bunch of prayer warriors. So you can count on us. We'll be lifting young Max up for that, and for you as well, brother, for your continued healing.
I appreciate it,
folks. We've got Craig Haugaard here. Craig, thank you so much for joining me, brother. I appreciate you so much. Your expertise that you give to us every single day for the Ag Report. We're so grateful for you, brother. Folks, we got more financial issues coming up right after this. You don't want to miss it. Stick with us. We'll talk a little bit about that inflation information that we talked about earlier today, as well as some other things. We'll be back after this.
It's up to us to stand up and say, enough is enough. All of this unbiblical stuff that's going on, whether it's abortion or transsexual or LGBTQ, widespread pornography, human trafficking, bottom line, it's still up to us. If we stop investing in these corporations that are trying to destroy us, sooner or later they're going to wake up.
To learn more about biblically responsible mutual funds and ETFs, go to timothyplan.com.
If a woman sees her baby on ultrasound, it doubles the likelihood that she'll choose life. On top of that, we share the gospel of Jesus Christ with her. This is why you should support preborn.
Then they sat me down. If you were to die today, do you think you would go to heaven? And I was like, no. Keeping the child was my first stepping stone. And ever since then, God has cleaned me up from the inside out.
Help support women in need.
What separates Crossroads Kids Club from other ministries to reach school-age children? What sets you guys apart?
First of all is our connection with local churches. We mobilize, equip, train, support local church partners. We're right inside the schools. There's a number of ministries that try to serve public school children outside of the school, but we're able to be right there on the campus. Another key thing is just our values. Our highest value is actually relationships. And so we're not a ministry that's driven by a lot of fancy technology or flashy stuff, but rather getting adults who love Jesus and who love kids to sit on the floor with a group of kids, to listen to them, to love them. So I would say the relational emphasis and the simplicity of the model is actually something that makes Crossroads special as well.
Help reach kids with the hope of the gospel. Visit reachOurschools.com.
The opinions and recommendations expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of the station or any of the program sponsors. Additionally, all products or services offered by the program sponsors may not be known by the program.
Hey, good to be here with you all, folks, on Financial Issues. I see the chat is as lively as ever today. Hey, Daryl, I see your question there. That's a great question. Great question for discussion. And if we have time today, we'll get to it. If not, we'll tee it up for tomorrow's show, because I think it's one that's well worth our time that you're asking there. But for right now, I think there's some important things to talk about here, namely inflation. And Sam, we have been looking at this here. So unfortunately, inflation has not gone anywhere in the first month and now a week into the Trump term. What can you tell us about this? What's going on here?
Well, this could be a little bit of a warning light for Donald Trump, because if you remember, we love everything he's doing with Doge and slashing back the transgender madness and abortion funding. He's doing God's work there. But ultimately, the reason why people voted him into office was to tackle the inflation problem problem, and yet it still persists. I realize it's only been 1 month. There's only so much President Trump can do about that right now. But people are still thinking, hey, things are still a little too expensive, and I'm not too pleased about that. So according to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, it shows just 32% of Americans think Trump is doing a good job with inflation, with 58% of those people saying inflation would be a major factor in deciding their vote in future elections. This also follows a recent CNN poll showing 62% say Trump has not gone far enough to reduce prices. And by the way, Seth, what's crazy about that number, that includes 47% of Republicans. So it's not just Democrats and independents who think Trump is doing a bad job with inflation. Democrats likely saying that just to say it, but Republicans also think he could be doing more to fix those prices. This also comes, as you know, following a pretty rough consumer sentiment dip in February, dropping actually to the lowest level since November of 2023.
Yeah, so this is interesting stuff here, Sam, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What do we make of this here? You know, is Trump doing a terrible job? Is he not fulfilling his promises? Are there other factors at play? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think?
Well, I don't think that he's doing a terrible job with it at all. All I think that this shows to Donald Trump is that you got to remember that your presidency is going to rise or it's going to fall based on how well the economy is doing. You can be doing all these things that we love, we were talking about with the social issues and things like that, but ultimately what you're going to be judged on is the economy, because that was the reason you were elected in the first place. So what I would recommend, and it's not even a policy change for Trump, I think it's purely a messaging thing. I think he should be doing more press conferences talking about what he's doing for inflation. Lately, he's been talking more about Ukraine and some of his more social policies. Again, that's great, but when I'm seeing these polls come out now, I'm thinking that he might want to shift his tone just a little bit to let the American people know, yes, I'm well aware that this is a problem, and here's the concrete steps that we're taking to address it. And those are things that he is actually doing behind the scenes, unleashing the oil industry, deregulating the economy, re-evaluating tariffs so that our trade deals are more fair, and also allowing businesses to be more competitive inside the U.S. Those are all things that are going to help the economy grow and beat down these inflation problems.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, man. I think you're spot on. I think it's important to remember Trump's not perfect. You know, he's actually far from perfect. Look at his personal stance on abortion, or look at who he chose for spiritual advisor. Far from perfect. Or, for goodness, the fact that he's been married like 4 times. Like, that's just, it sounds mean, but it just is the way it is. But at the same time, I think he is the man for the job. Like you said, Sam, he's only been at this for a month and like 5 days, right? A month, about 35 days.
It's crazy, right? It feels like he's been president for 3 years.
Forever, absolutely. But I've heard those talking points from the left. People are saying, well, Trump promised all these things and none of them are happening. Common sense, folks. It takes time. It takes time to clean up a mess. And let's be honest, Trump was given a huge mess. Huge mess. And he is attacking these issues, but it's going to take some time. It absolutely is. He's you know, like you mentioned, Sam, he's working on, oil. He's working on the border. I think the border is going to be a big deal. Big deal. Absolutely. Sam, you mentioned this yesterday when we were talking about this. Ronald Reagan's cleanup time from inheriting the mess that was the Jimmy Carter era took about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, right? It was about
just to get inflation under control, and you didn't really start to feel the Reagan boom until the end of his first term. So it really takes some time to feel the effect of these things.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a good as time as any to say, yeah, you know what? We would love to see some inflation coming down. Also, to know these things take time, and I think to have a little bit of patience too. I have thought about the same thing though, Sam. You're exactly right. I'm just waiting to see gas prices trickle down to what they were in, say, 2017. As of right now, I'll tell you, fuel prices as of today, the national average is $3.14. That's better than a lot of times during the Biden administration, especially in the summer of 2022, but it's not where it was in that first term. I think it's a good reminder to say these things take time. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think that ultimately the problem here is a policy problem. I don't think that it's Donald Trump's forgetting about these things. I think what you're seeing in these numbers is just a messaging thing with Trump. He needs to come out and address that this is a problem and be hammering it home every day how he's fixing this. And because that's how people are hurting right now. As much as we celebrate all the other wins, you still come home and you look at your checkbook and you think, things are still not the way I want them to be. And as I said, that's how he's going to be judged in the end.
That's exactly
rightly or wrongly.
Exactly right. And Debbie from Kentucky. Debbie, I haven't seen you before in the chat. It's good to have you. A great comment here saying President Trump trying to stop a war. It's pretty important because knows we were sending billions of tax dollars there, I assume to Ukraine. She says, I think we'll have time to work on the economy over the next few months. Just have to be patient. He's going to have the oil companies drill, baby, drill, but it takes time. Debbie, you're spot on.
She's 100% right.
It takes time. It takes time. And there's that happening too. That's right. He's trying to stop a war that his predecessor fueled and that 2 other countries are starting. So he's trying to stop a fight that 3 different parties have been trying to egg on, basically. So, and you can argue, of course, egg on this, that, who was the aggressor. Obviously, Russia was the aggressor invading Ukraine. I also think that Ukraine certainly saw an opportunity with the United States to be able to get a lot of tax dollars, for instance. And so he's just trying to put a stop to that. He's trying to bring about peace. I think it's a good thing. So it takes time. Now, Sam, there's one aspect to this that you had mentioned could benefit Trump, and it's AI. And that brings us to our next story here, actually, that Apple is opening an AI factory. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, I think AI is really going to be a key to getting out of this whole mess, because as much as we're afraid that AI is going to take away jobs, which that is certainly an understandable fear, it's also about the potential to unleash the economy, because if you have this technology that's aiding you in every area of your job, that's going to exponentially increase your productivity, which also could lead to new innovation and new jobs we can't even possibly imagine, as well as new products that are going to help the United States economy just explode. So that is a real possibility, and Donald Trump knows it. You saw him recently courting OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle, where they announced their $500 billion AI infrastructure venture, Stargate. Well, now Apple is getting on board with something like that, too. They also announced a $500 billion investment in the U.S., a 250,000 square foot AI server factory in Houston, Texas. The new factory will open next year and is part of a much larger 4-year plan to expand AI from Apple in the United States. They say with this factory alone, they're going to hire something around 20,000 employees.
Yeah, so folks, listen, like it or not, and I got to say, me personally, Sam, I'm not comfortable with AI a lot yet, but I do see the benefits of it. This is the way the world's going, man. Like, this is the way the world's going. It's like when we got smartphones, there's a certain level where there's no going back.
I had someone ask me, would it have been better if AI wasn't invented? And I said, well, I don't really want to answer that question because it's here. So there's no point in even questioning what woulda, coulda. It's here now, and the question is, what are you going to do with it?
There's a line, and I think the Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian, where Aslan says we can never know what would have. Aslan, of course, is the Christ figure, and he says we can never know what would have happened. That's good wisdom. We shouldn't worry about what would have happened and rather focus on what did happen. And what did happen is that AI is rapidly taking over everything. And so I think it's a good reminder for us to be good stewards even of that as well, Sam, that this is a gift that God has given to us, just like food, just like relationships. Those are good things that can be used for great evil. And so we have to be good stewards of them, definitely. Speaking of being a good steward, Sam, we got a great comment here from Daniel in Tennessee that I'd love for you to read for us there. I think this is really good to summarize what our strategy is here. What is Daniel saying?
Yeah, I love this comment. So this is Daniel from Tennessee. He says, it takes time to build a portfolio. I've been a member since 2015 and still haven't finished building my portfolio. I don't mind being overweight in cash and fixed income, though. As I sleep good at night, I just keep listening and asking questions.
Yeah, Daniel, that's awesome, man. And I'm pleased that you've been a member for so long and you haven't finished building your portfolio. Folks, that's a great reminder. Daniel's been at this now for 10 years, and his portfolio is still growing. That's the way that it goes oftentimes, is a long-term strategy. You're not going to have your portfolio done overnight. It's going to take time. And, I do love what you said there, Daniel, although we do have a lot of options right now on the buy list. There's, as our founder Dan Celia used to say, there's great value in not losing. And if it helps you sleep good at night, that's awesome. That's awesome to be able to feel like you're in a position where you're comfortable. I really think that is fantastic. And, speaking of this steadfastness, Daniel, really, I think reminds me of someone who is steadfast. The scripture speaks to this, folks. James 1:12, a good place to end our show, says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. So, your investment journey will come with trials, and it will be long, as Daniel has pointed out to us, 10 years or more. You got to remain steadfast, folks. And the key to doing that is to honor God with what he's given to you, with all of your money. We believe that it can be a great act of worship to invest your money in a way that honors God, to make it grow, to see it grow little by little. Of course, this verse, though, is not merely talking about investments. Actually, it's really not talking about investments. We can apply it to that, but it's encouraging believers to stand fast in a world that hates them. This is talking about the gospel. You will be hated. You will be mistreated for following Christ, but stand firm. Stand firm. Remain steadfast. Be confident in God, and He will bless you for it. The scripture says, those who honor me, surely I will honor. That's God speaking. So we can be confident of this, folks. It was a great show. I'm grateful for each of you, and we'll do it again tomorrow, God willing. Remember, everything you have belongs to the Lord. Let's be found good and faithful stewards with it. God bless you all. And Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow for more financial issues.
If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under.
Thank you for joining us. This has been an FISM production.